Now that Microsoft is officially out of the console war, it's time to acknowledge reality that the console war essentially amounts to Nintendo beating up Sony over and over again while PC gamers try and gaslight people into thinking that their platform is relevant. That's essentially where we're at right now because PlayStation is not succeeding. Grand Theft Auto 6 is not going to save PlayStation, especially if it gets ported over to Nintendo. There aren't any like new IPs that are going to save the platform. The era of like realistic AAA games driving PlayStation sales is over. Like more and more, we're seeing these games come over to Nintendo platforms day and date. And once and as this becomes more and more common, it is going to become more and more difficult for developers to gaslight shareholders into thinking that their games don't do well on Nintendo platforms like they have traditionally. Because their lack of support for Nintendo does not come from a long history of releasing games on the platform and them failing. It's them deliberately undermining the console at every possible opportunity. So, what we're seeing now is just the end result of that strategy, in which the games are lazy, they are uninspired, they are derivative, they are the same thing over and over again. On PlayStation. On Nintendo, we get wildly different, unique experiences. It's amusing to me how the cope for the general gaming community is this idea that, like, indies are saving gaming, bro, but the reality is Nintendo is saving gaming. Nintendo puts out better, higher quality games more frequently than even the most popular of indie devs. Silk Song had an 8-year development cycle. We're at the point now where it's safe to say that the indie scene is not going to circumvent the Nintendo thing. Because that was something that I was told back in the day, was that 2D platformers are better than Mario. Like, we're going to see more and more of these things, and nobody's going to want to play 2D Mario in the future. And what happens? They put out Super Mario Bros. Wonder. It's a huge, massive hit. And not only that, New Super Mario Bros. U goes on to sell like 25 million units, years after release. It's almost like Mario is the face of video games or something, and that people actually like 2D Mario, something that like a lot of people in the sphere can't wrap their little minds around. But that is how this has been going for years. Like to this day, you still see people argue whether the PS3 or the 360 won that console generation, when anybody who was there understood that Nintendo did. Not just because of the success of the Wii, but because of the DS, which was this huge cultural milestone that stopped the stopped the PS2 and led the way to Nintendo's domination that still continues to this day. In a lot of ways, Nintendo has not had any real competition ever, especially when it comes to establishing actual mascot characters that people recognize throughout generations. Like, what has PlayStation done aside from trick people into thinking that like Ghost of Tsushima is a historically accurate samurai game? It's like, when you look behind the hood, when you pull back the curtain, the reality is that Sony was never good. They were never popular. They never had anything going for them. Nobody liked their games. And the opposite is true for Nintendo. It's gotten so bad where it genuinely feels at this point in time that the Nintendo GameCube was more popular than the PlayStation 2. And the reason for that being is that people actually played the games on GameCube. The fact of the matter is, Nintendo Switch 2 having GameCube games at launch was a huge draw for the platform. This is the first time that these games have ever been re-released to a new audience, and as such, people are thrilled at the idea of playing Wind Waker, of playing Soul Calibur 2, of playing Chibi Robo. Like, there's so much to look forward to on GameCube that I find it very strange, very odd how the general gaming community has bent over backwards to create this fan fiction that the PS2 was this huge cultural phenomenon. Well, if the PS2 was so great, why doesn't anyone talk about or play those games? Like what even came out in the PS2's first year? What was bigger than Super Smash Bros. And Melee? Nothing, right? Grand Theft Auto is not on the same level as any of Nintendo's brands. And you can cry about that. You can argue that Grand Theft Auto pulls in a lot of money, but if you look at the numbers, you'll realize that that's only because of Grand Theft Auto 5 and that's only because of microtransactions. It has nothing to do with the actual product. Pokemon is bigger. Street Fighter is bigger. Like Grand Theft Auto doesn't really have a fan base. Grand Theft Auto is only popular because of this idea that it's adult and edgy. Something that is going to become more and more unappealing as its demographic of little children grows up and starts acknowledging that this stuff is and always has been cringe. At this point, critics of Nintendo, the enemy of Nintendo, they don't even have a proper competitor for the Switch 2 or even the original Switch. All they can do is kind of sit there and pretend that the new game didn't do very well or that the hardware isn't selling or that the sales are slowing down and that no one cares about Nintendo no more. Like they're constantly pretending that Nikkei is going to take off and destroy Nintendo and that I don't know, the CCP, Tencent is less evil than Nintendo. Like the things I've heard recently in regards to the state of Nintendo is just laughably stupid, especially in regards to the gaming crash, because everyone acknowledges that the gaming crash is a thing now, that games are getting worse. I've been saying this since 2008, but nobody wants to acknowledge Nobody wants to admit that Nintendo is doing well and is going to survive the economic recession. Like, people don't seem to understand why Nintendo is going to do well. The simple fact of the matter is the Nintendo Switch 1 has not been abandoned, its generation has not ended, and its features will continue to tie into Switch 2's going forward. I think we are going to see very few cases of Switch 2 exclusive games being produced by Nintendo. I think we're going to see a lot of lower budget games continue to launch on Switch 1 for years. This is I don't see the Switch 2 as a proper replacement for the Switch 1. It's just like an upgraded version of it. So the Switch 1's generation is still ongoing, and people are still playing this console. They're still buying new games for it. Like, you can see this on the eShop, actually, how radically different the Switch 1 eShop is than the Switch 2 eShop. So like the even the big clutch argument that a lot of these people have that well, the Switch 2 won't sell as well as the Switch 1, it doesn't matter because the Switch 1 is still on the market. It doesn't matter because it's still making the money, and it's becoming harder and harder to downplay the company. It really is. You can't really look at things from a console hardware perspective anymore because Xbox's plan going forward was to eliminate the hardware entirely and just be a subscription service that just releases their games on all major platforms. So you'll be able to play Game Pass on Nintendo, on PlayStation, on your smart TV. That was the idea. And yet they raised the prices so much that nobody's happy with them. It's not a good deal for the consumer anymore. And what's more, nobody they didn't even transition to the point where they were able to phase the hardware out anyway. So essentially, there's just nowhere for Xbox to develop. They have made so many critical mistakes over the past decade that there's no real hope of recovery for them. Not that they were ever relevant, but there is no real hope of recovery for them at this stage. And without Xbox, you have considerably less support for the third parties who now have to go all in on the PlayStation and PC thing if they want to keep up their narrative that Nintendo doesn't buy third party games. And I think for a lot of younger studios, a lot of ones who weren't around in the 90s when PlayStation was going around swooping up all these third parties with these exclusive contracts, I think, um, a lot of PC centric developers, like the Hitman guys, like they are going to start releasing their games on Nintendo Switch. They may still release on PC first, or like maybe it'll be day and date, but at the same time, if you see a Nintendo and a PC release side by side, everyone's obviously going to go for the Nintendo version. And that's just going to be the reality of it going forward, is that there's going to be this slow choke out of Nintendo Switch 2 getting major PC games like games like say 007 First Light. That's been confirmed at this point. Like you're going to see more stuff like that. You're going to see Nintendo just do everything in their power to just bring these developers on board, while companies like Square, companies like Konami, companies like EA, Capcom, like they all just struggle, like continue struggling with their PlayStation exclusives, because not only are these games not doing well when they actually come out, they take way too long to make. Pragmata, we've been waiting an entire console generation for it, and by the time it finally comes out, it's going to be underwhelming. When you compare that with Donkey Kong Bonanza, which has come out, been a huge success, and now we're on to the next thing. Like Pragmata just isn't going to go anywhere. Like it's gonna come out. It might be good, it might not, but no matter what happens, like there's not gonna be a follow up or a sequel or something else from the developers for a long time. And meanwhile, Nintendo is just stomping out the competition one at a time, like insects. And no matter how many holdouts there are, like we're at the point now where the entire industry is hedging all their bets on Grand Theft Auto 6, like saving the 2000s gaming industry. They need Grand Theft Auto 6 to come out and just get people to start spending more money on games. They're going to price hike like PlayStation and Xbox titles. They need this game to come out to start driving sales again. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to sell like a lot, but when it's over, when everybody has their copy, everyone who's serious about gaming will just go back and start playing more Nintendo games, because I think we're at the point now where gamers are willing to acknowledge that something like Super Mario Galaxy, which is well made, engaging, fun, is better than something like Grand Theft Auto, which really is just the same thing over and over and over again with no real depth or thought put to it. We're at the point now where Nintendo is so dominant in what they do that even something like Grand Theft Auto or Minecraft can't really stop their forward momentum. Like we're past the point where we can expect Nintendo to ever go third party. It's not even something that anyone talks about anymore. But you know, the reality hasn't caught up with the industry yet, that they're not going to magically go out of business and start magically becoming unpopular. Like they are going to dominate the console space going forward. And that means once they're done with the console space, they are eventually going to start choking out the overpriced, irrelevant PC space as well. Like we are going to see more people start to acknowledge that PC gaming is not as good as what Nintendo does. That's always been true, but up to this point, we've had this really strange kind of counterculture of terminally online weirdos who think PC gaming is a lot more relevant than it actually is. Like in the near future, we will see more people start speaking out against the narratives of PC gaming, like the idea that piracy is legal, that there's nothing wrong with modding, that there's nothing wrong with plagiarism. We're going to see more and more people push back against these kind of arguments. And I think a lot of it's going to be kicked off by the Power World lawsuit. At the very least, we're already kind of seeing this now. I think people are going to start realizing that the hate towards Pokemon is completely unwarranted and makes no sense. Dragging something like Pokepia into it, which is not even a game made by Game Freak, it's really going to blow up in people's faces, I think. And there's only so much you can cry about this brand and like say it sucks before you start getting some serious pushback by fans. And we're kind of on the verge of that happening, but I do think like Nintendo winning the Power World lawsuit is going to be a major, major kick in the nuts to these people. Like this is, I think, a big enough deal to kind of kill like the whole Pokemon hate thing at least for now. Like, I don't know how much longer they can keep doing this. But, Pokemon isn't Nintendo's only brand. Like, and that's something that we do need to talk about is that Nintendo has dozens of popular franchises now, and there's just is no downplaying all of them. And that's something that I think a lot of Nintendo haters really need to wrap their minds around.